Thank you so much for joining us. And if you made it to the last session of the day, give yourself a round of applause because it's been a long day, hasn't it? I think we all need to build up our conference stamina because midday I was like, oh, got to get back in the groove of this. So thank you so much for joining us to the California Alliance for Inclusive Schooling Policy Summit. I am Audrey Sandoval Gomez. I'm the co-director of the Thompson Policy Institute at Chapman University and part of the CAIS steering committee, And so on behalf of our CAIS steering committee, I'd like to welcome all of you to our session on strengthening TK-12 EPP partnerships to ensure effective, meaningful, and inclusive education for all learners during complex times. I think I have the right session up. Okay, let's just go. All right, so our Daryl and Steve, do I need to wait for the slides or we're good? Okay, one moment, everyone, while we get the slides going. There we go. Voila. Perfect. Thanks to Steve and Daryl, our tech guys over here, making things happen. Thank you so much. All right. So here is our agenda for this session. We have some case updates, and then we'll be joined by Mary Vixie Sandy, who's the Executive Director for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, providing our keynote. And then we're going to have some faculty from Claremont Graduate University, as well as Cal State University of Long Beach, who will be presenting some innovative approaches at their respective universities on strengthening relationships and about their credentials programming. And then we will be closing. We will have time for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions for any of our presenters, we will have time for that. So if you're unfamiliar with the California Alliance for Inclusive Schooling, this is some information about who we are and what we do. We have been operating for since 2018, and our founding co-chairs were Dr. Don Cardinal and Dr. Marquita Greneau-Shire. And also we've had some support from Paul Sindelar, who's from Cedar. So our steering committee covers various organizations and state agencies, including the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, Thompson Policy Institute, CAPC, many independent and state universities. CAIS has developed 3 subcommittees, and those subcommittees are the Educator Preparation Subcommittee, an Inclusive Principal Leadership Subcommittee, and then we have an overall initiatives related to policy and preparation. So if you're interested in learning more about CAIS and who we are, I will have information about that at the end of our presentation. So just a couple updates of what CAIS has been up to. Recently, CAIS was awarded a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant, and which focuses on effective inclusion and transition practices at middle school and high school level. So we've been working and partnering with LEAs in California to support inclusive education, as well as transition efforts for LEAs. And that's our strategic practices for the advancement of inclusive schooling. I know that's a mouthful, but we call that our SPACE grant. So we thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their support. Additionally, with the Cedar Center, we have done lots of collaboration with the Cedar Center and in areas of communities of practice, establishing statewide communities of practices for special education teacher ed programs that are engaged in the redesign process, developing a resource repository for resources for extensive support needs. We've had a critical collaboration series. They've been pretty much virtual, and that's really focused on disability studies, critical race theory, dual credential programs, and we hope to bring a variety of other webinars in the upcoming year. And then lastly, we have our CAIS Inclusive Principal Leadership Subcommittee. And we have also done a handful of webinars focused on principal inclusive leadership and establishing inclusive climates and cultures, and having and bringing lots of principals and directors at the LEA level together to have some PD surrounding inclusive practices and how to support that. And then if I'd like to invite Virginia, did you want to come up now to provide an update on Educator Preparation Subcommittee?
Good afternoon, everybody. There we go. Yes, so Vicki Graff and I have the honor and opportunity to be the co-chairs of the Educator Preparation Subcommittee. I noticed by looking at this slide that we really need a logo, don't we? We need something. Okay, so we'll work on that for this year. So we have we have focused on making connections with other committees, other organizations, other that also focus on education preparation. And for example, CAPC-TED is a natural. We have done things with them. You've just heard Audrey talk about what CEDAR is doing, and a lot of that has been with Linda Blanton's encouragement and help putting together the projects that CEDAR is doing with projects that CAPC is involved in as well. So those are some examples of how we're doing that. Our focus, of course, in our subcommittee is on inclusive practices. So we are doing everything that will bring forward the ideas of MTSS and so forth to our teacher preparation programs. So we have that link between what CAIS is doing in schools with what we are doing to prepare the teachers of the future. That is my nutshell. Let's see, yes. Okay, so I did want to give another advertisement for what we just talked about, if you were downstairs in the CAPC-TED meeting, for the community of practice that is being started by CAPC-TED, CAIS Preparation, and CEDAR. And we'd love to have you all sign up for that. If you're interested, we're looking at trauma-based practices, we're looking at TPAs, we're looking at clinical practice and extensive support needs. Thank you. And literacy. Okay. Okay. Very good. And so we're focusing on having one of those for like every 5 to 6 weeks. We'll probably take a hiatus over the summer, and then we'll come back in the fall as well. So we'll be passing around that sign-up sheet. Is that all right, Ann? All right, thank you. Okay, that is about our preparation subcommittee. We're very excited to be doing all these different things with everybody else as well.
All right, thank you, Virginia. And now I'd like to invite up my colleague, Dr. Megan Kosher.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. I'm Megan Kosher. I am director of the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability at Chapman University. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote today. Just wanted to highlight some of the amazing successes that we have had in the state in regard to equity and access for students with disabilities. We have the work of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing that we're going to hear today. We have the work from the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools in recruiting, preparing, and retaining teachers of color to promote equity and opportunity and justice. We have the technical assistance centers funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, CTEP through CSU, and then CalEpic from Chapman University that works with independent colleges and universities. We have AB 692, which is a bill supported by Senator Cortese that focuses on inclusion and access for students with disabilities across the state. So many things to celebrate and still so much work to do to improve equity access for all students, including students with disabilities. We still see that there's a long way to go in terms of improving outcomes and equity for students with disabilities across the state. That is why the work of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing has been so critical in ensuring that all teachers are prepared to teach all students. We are so excited to have our keynote speaker here, Dr. Mary Vixie Sandy, Executive Director of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, to share the latest information on the work of the commission. I remember, Mary, being at a presentation about a year ago, and you mentioned the opportunities that arise. I think that what the term that you used is when the soil has been loosened. And that so much of opportunities have come out of even the past 2 years, innovation that's come out of the past 2 years. We're so excited to hear about the work that the commission is doing. Welcome, Dr. Mary Sandy.
Well, what a pleasure it is to see all of you here. I am so glad they provided rich snacks, aren't you? That's a really good strategy. Feed the people. That's an old PTA trick, you know. You can get them to come to a meeting if you cook for them. But I just really have to say, I'm so honored to be a participant with CAIS in this work and this deep focus on inclusive schooling. I have had this opportunity with some of you in the room in prior meetings. I think pre-COVID, talking about my own experiences as a parent of a child who had special needs that were almost completely ignored and avoided through his K-12 education, and what a disappointment that was for me, and what a perspective it gave me about special education, which was not positive. And that's just true confessions. I've had a full-on conversion, and Kristen Wright sitting right here, and Vicki Graff, and others of you in the room have been absolutely part of that, showing me not just the potential, but just the huge possibility that exists through inclusive schooling and through you know, this work. So what I'm going to do here for the next little bit is retrospective, reflective historian. I've become one of the historians in the room. I used to be very young in here, and I learned a lot in this room, but I'm not as young as I used to be. So but I think it's important, and we talked some about this earlier. If you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? So I think for me, this is an opportunity to talk about some of the big, really important inflection points for us, and talk about how what we've been doing to really strengthen preparation of teachers to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. How many of you had the opportunity to participate in the One System report, the development of the One System report? Some of you did. Okay, not many of you. Okay, so about a decade ago, we took, can you believe it's been a decade? I'm counting right? It's 2023, and we really started this in 13, 14, right? The question that was before us, we had Linda Darling Hammond chairing the commission. We had Michael Kirst, president of the State Board of Education. We had Jerry Brown in the governorship. We thought, why not tackle special education and take a look at all of the systems that we have in California that shape how we provide services to students with special needs. And there's One System, Reforming Education to Serve All Students report of the California Statewide Task Force on Special Education was the product of that in 2015. It was a collaborative effort between the Commission and the State Board of Education and the Department of Education. And in that process, we defined a vision statement for ourselves. And it's up on your screen. I'm going to read it out loud because it's important to see it, hear it, think it, let it sink in. In a coherent system of education, all children are considered general education students first, and all educators, regardless of which students they're assigned to serve, have a collective responsibility to see that all children receive the education and supports they need to maximize their development and potential so that they can participate meaningfully in the nation's economy and democracy. I was asked to talk about what the Commission's vision for inclusive schooling is. It's anchored right there, that all teachers are teachers of all students are gen ed students first, and all students need intervention and support at different times in their careers. I think that was a critical thing for us to articulate within that report. The report was sweeping. It looked at early education. It looked at evidence-based schooling and classroom practices, looked at educator preparation and professional learning. Thank you for your work on that committee, Virginia. I looked at assessment, how we're assessing, who we're assessing, what we're doing with assessment results, looked at accountability, family and student engagement, special education financing, all of it together. And I would say this is one of the most durable reports I've ever been part of. It got huge exposure in the legislature and all across the state. And a lot has really come from that report. It's been a blueprint that's been alive and lively. Within the educator preparation and professional learning set of work, the subcommittee, the vision there was that California's system of teacher credentialing needs to ensure that all teachers, both general education and special education, enter the profession able to effectively use needs-based interventions and collaborate with other educators in a unified system. How radical does that sound to you on a scale of 1 to 10? Is that a radical vision, or is that, yeah, we're all kind of bought into this? It's not the way we've been serving, the way we were serving and preparing our teachers, not by a long mile. Within that, the report called for us to establish a common foundation of preparation for general education and special education teachers. It called for us to de-silo, to move away from working with students based on the disabilities that they had. And instead, and Kristen Wright, you were critical in helping me understand this. In fact, I remember a conversation with you that helped us shift some language in our own work, looking at the intensity of needs that students bring and differentiating on that axis instead of based on you're prepared to work with students with these disabilities and it was about a needs-based system. And this was a critical piece of the work. The report called for us to authorize special education teachers to instruct and provide any needed support to general education students as well as students with disabilities. We ran into a bit of a rock in the road on that particular aspect, but I would say these other two aspects of the recommendations of the report have been absolutely key to the work the Commission's been doing. Actually, before I go to that one, the back button. Okay, so, there we go. We'll just stick with that for a second. There we go. We have established a common trunk of preparation, and that was a really important thing we did. This notion that all teachers are going to be teachers of all students means we need to have a common foundation, and there's some very important work that's been underway as special ed programs and general ed programs have been redesigning their work, and so we'll get to that in a minute. I want to just take a minute to recognize the context, though, in which we've been doing this, of critical and chronic shortages that have been with us for years and decades, really. I had the opportunity to present a version of this to the State Board of Education as we were having this kind of retrospective moment. And, class size reduction, were any of you around for class size reduction, or have I just I'm really, thank you. You are my people, okay. CSR, we called it at the time. It created this immediate critical emergency shortage of teachers. And that shortage led to incredible investment in teacher preparation and recruitment and development. We had many initiatives that were put into place for a few years, and we actually did increase significantly. We almost eradicated shortages of teachers and the use of emergency permits to fill classrooms. It was an extraordinary moment. But after that moment, as we began to move out of that time of intense investment and development into and towards a recession, what we actually saw was that overall teacher preparation enrollments for all subjects declined by more than 70%. from that high point. 30 special education programs during the recession were put on a moratorium status or reduced in size. Between 2015 and 2016, 17 school years, 13.4% of teachers teaching in special education schools left the profession or state, and another 7.3% moved between schools within California. Combined, more than 1 out of 5 teachers teaching in special education schools left their positions, which was more than any other subject. So special education has experienced, maybe we've never gotten to the best of times, but we certainly have experienced the worst of times. You know, we are about half of the credentials that we're issuing. Whoops, I've gone too far now. Oh, okay, just hang on. About half the credentials we issue right now to all teachers go to people who are fully prepared to teach, and the other half go to people who are filling classrooms or are in internship programs. And I am not a person who disrespects the intern route. I think it's a very important strategy in our overall system of preparation. But I fear that our bench is not deep enough to support the number of teachers learning how to teach. We need a deeper bench. And when half of the documents we're going to people who are not fully prepared, we have a problem. And it's a problem that's even worse in special education, where 2 out of every 3 new special education recruits enter the field without having completed preparation. That's significant. So we've been working on some reform efforts and working in the context of teacher shortages, as you know. In terms of general education, we adopted new standards in 2016 that put a high premium on inclusion as a strategy, as something that every single gen ed teacher needed to know a whole lot more about. Universal design for learning is a core practice that we expect general education teachers to learn and be able to use with all students. Multi-tiered systems of support. I think one of the most important outgrowths of this Special Education Task Force report was the creation of this system of multi-tiered system of supports. I think it may be one of the most important things we've done to change schooling in decades. And teaching our gen ed teachers how to work in a system with other adults, serving children at different tiers has been a critical part of what we're trying to do. Using technology, providing supportive learning environments for students with disabilities, monitoring progress towards and helping gen ed teachers understand how to work effectively in the IEP process. It's been a key part of what we've been building in the gen ed space. 2 years later, we adopted new standards for the education specialist. Actually, we adopted the new structure for the credential and actually began to move from working with students or teachers to prepare them for specific disability areas and into a more integrated approach to working with students based on the significance and severity of their needs. This is no surprise to the special ed faculty in the room. I know this. You all have been working very hard on addressing and working towards meeting the standards that have been built and adopted over the last few years. And congratulations to you. This has been a very important year. And we're headed to the fall when we're implementing the new programs based on all of these reforms. It's very exciting. Performance assessments have also been a critical part of this overall effort. We built our TPAs 20 years ago, and we've been using them intensively in gen ed spaces to help teachers learn some of the fundamentals here. How do you plan instruction? How do you recognize and incorporate the assets of the students you're teaching? How do you deliver instruction and know who got it, who didn't get it? What are you going to do next? For those who didn't get it or those who did, how are you going to design and develop and promote your instruction of the students you're teaching? We've built that for gen ed. We've built it for special education. We're finishing our field test right now and looking forward to how this is going to help shape what we're doing in special ed as we go forward. How are we doing on time? I just want to make sure, 5 minutes? You want me? Okay, wind up in 5. Okay. So I probably don't need to go through some of these data points. I can if you'd like, but there are about 141 preliminary ed specialist programs in California. They're offered by 70 institutions. 68 of them are offering mild to moderate support needs. 47 are offering programs for extensive support needs, 18 in early childhood, 6 for deaf and hard of hearing, and 2 for visual impairments. We had hoped that with the reforms, we would begin to see more dual credentials coming out so that the teachers really did have a strong foundation in general education and special education and could move seamlessly across these two credentials and provide services as we grow multi-tiered systems of support. We've seen blended programs emerging. We did a survey of 70 institutions, got about 41 responses, and found that 32 of them either have or have been designing programs to enable gen ed and special ed candidates to take common courses. This is a key part of what we're trying to do. If all teachers are teachers of all students, learning about your students together and engaging with that population together, it's a really critical outcome. So kudos to those of you that have been working on this. It's a significant piece of work. Just want to highlight, I've been working, Vicki Graff is one of the people I have on speed dial. Any question I have, I call her or Kristen or, Virginia. I haven't called you yet because I don't have your number, but we can fix that right now. So I asked Vicki if she would give me an example of what are you doing to address the Common Core with your gen ed and special ed teachers? And this is an outline of what they're doing in their multiple subject and special ed program. And the issues that they're working on together in the common trunk, and then the various aspects of specialization that have to be taken up by the specialists as they move along. Kudos to that leadership work that you're doing there, Vicki, to help us see how that gets done and gets done well. CAIS has been doing some really important work here too, the California Alliance for Inclusive Schooling. They had some mini grants that they made available to programs to look at how they could begin to really move the needle on special education and inclusion. I've got 3 or 4 slides here, but I don't want to jump into anybody else's time. I just want to say that last October, we had some great previews and feedback from programs that got these mini grants, and they've done some amazing work at Long Beach, at UC Santa Barbara, bringing their gen ed and special ed faculty together to build this common core of preparation. University of Laverne, if you have the opportunity, any of those people in the room? Yes, raise your hand. Yes, yes. Kudos to you for the work that you've done, and to CAIS for putting the funding out there to sponsor and support this work. With these examples and exemplars out there, we have some items on the horizon that we can look at and say, okay, here's a way to get this done. It doesn't have to be an impossible task. In fact, it can be an extraordinary development task for a group of faculty who want to take that on. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the state investments that have been made. There we go. And have really privileged recruitment and development of programs to support this work, beginning with the undergraduate pathways for STEM and special education. We saw some great uptake of that over the last several years, and that's a funding program that's about to get a shot in the arm. Another 10 million is proposed in this budget year. We had $50 million for local solutions grants to help LEAs with their recruitment efforts. That was also targeting education specialists. The classified school improvement program, or school employee teacher credentialing program, very successful program that's driving and creating opportunities for classified staff to earn their credentials. And it's going to bring a number of teachers into the classroom from local school districts. It's a very important part of the strategy. Any of you working on residency grants? Okay, my friends, we need to work on this. Okay, there's a lot of money to build residency programs. Again, the residency programs, do you know what they are? I'm just going to tell you because I want to be sure you do. Residency programs enable you to place your candidates in the classroom of a cooperating teacher based on a program you develop collaboratively with a local education agency. We have, between the first round of funding and the second round of funding, we have $400 million. That's a lot of money in our sector to build this infrastructure. And it's a fantastic way for us to bring our special education teachers into the gen ed space, the multi-tiered system of support space, and to develop a workforce that the research is telling us residency programs have a huge staying impact for people who come through them. So if you're not part of a planning grant yet, wait for the next RFA coming from the CTC, because we'd like for you to participate in building with an LEA a residency model that can help us move more teachers into the system through a very strong approach. So I just want to summarize and conclude by saying that the task force report has spawned a huge amount of work for us. It's been an inspiration, and the vision is the vision we still adhere to very strongly at the commission. This common trunk of preparation is a really important concept, an anchoring piece of this. It may feel like an anchor. So far it's heavy and it puts a little drag on your system, perhaps, but it's an important common shared base of knowledge that all teachers should be able to get through their preparation programs and to use as they collaborate in the teaching of all of our students. Let's see, I'm just going to move on to my last slide. Sorry, there you go. In terms of next steps, we need to double down and double the number of teachers coming through our teacher preparation programs. We have got to address this. It's going to take time. We have resources to help you do it. We need to build our institutional capacity to prepare special education teachers. Many of you are working on this and have been doing this, and I know it's been a hard time pulling together your programs and your program documents for review, but you've done it. And you're making huge progress, and we're headed toward a fall where it's a new day in what we're doing. And thank you for kudos to all of you that have been involved in doing that. We need to continue to really focus on expansion of multi-tiered system of support as an organizing structure. The more we can place our teachers in school districts, and I think 60% right now of the school districts in this state, I think, am I wrong on that? Anybody at this table know whether I've got that right or wrong? I think it's about 60% of our districts are participating in MTSS, and there's more money to grow it and expand it. It's a really important part of what we're trying to do here in terms of improving services to all students. We need to incentivize the development of dual credential programs. The more effective we can be at preparing teachers to work across these settings, the stronger our workforce is going to be. And so please consider that a very important priority for you. It's a very important priority for the CTC. And really collectively, I think this is a really important point. We have to figure out how to reduce attrition in the workforce. Probably the biggest solution to the teacher shortage is to retain the teachers that we have. And that is a very hard thing to say right now in the context of COVID. Teachers have been under extraordinary pressure and the likes of which I've never seen. I just can't say how reach the depth of my admiration for the teachers who show up and do this work every single day with the level of angst and stress and uncertainty and fear that's around them. And they're doing it. And, you know, as I've said before to different groups at Cal Council, it's important that we have their back while they're doing it. The more that teaching community can feel the support and the respect of those of us that prepared them, those of us that have licensed them, those of us that send our children into their care every day, the better shot we're going to have at keeping them in the profession. That's a task that we all need to really mount up and be ready over the coming years to figure out how we keep the workforce that we're developing. So that is my trip through history, and thank you for your patience and indulgence in that. And that concludes my.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know many of you do not know who I am. I'm Linda Blanton from Cedar. You've seen Cedar mentioned on a lot of these slides. And I have the privilege of being here for this conference along with my colleague, Kate Adams. We're both through the University of Florida. But I have the pleasure of introducing folks who are going to provide examples of teacher ed for inclusion in programs in California, one independent and one CSU example. First, we're going to start with Eddie Partida, who is the Director of Teacher Ed at Claremont Graduate University. And he is virtual, so we'll start with him and he'll present for approximately 12 minutes, and then we'll move to Cal State Long Beach. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eddie.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here for this. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I think that this slide deck has been shared with you all, but if you don't, I can put it in the chat. So once again, my name is Eddie Partida. I'm the Director of Teacher Education at Claremont Graduate University, and the title of my talk is Centering Critical Social Justice to Support Transformative School Ecologies. And I'm going to start with the quote that we start with our partners when we enter any kind of project or work, and that is from one of our favorite scholars, Dr. Crystal Lara. And she says that challenging and unlearning what we assume we know about people, places, and things, including ourselves, is uncomfortable. And finagling around contradictions and tensions of implicit and explicit bias is easier than diving into and grappling with them. So we invite our partners to dive in with us, right? So that's exactly what educators ought to be doing, is diving into the wreckage. So I'll talk a lot about this, or we start with this because when entering partnerships, and we're talking about forming strong partnerships between IHEs and LEAs, you really are starting from a foundation of values. At least that's where we start. And so we try to be really explicit about the work that we do and what our values are and what our perspectives are. So I'll talk a little bit about that and how we have created a framework to do this work with IHE partners. I also want to quickly acknowledge, do a quick land acknowledgement. So encourage you all, if you don't already, to consider how learning about and understanding the ancestral lands that you work and live and teach at help us be in better relationship with not just the land and Native people, but also each other. I also want to acknowledge our wonderful team. We've been doing this work here at Claremont Graduate University for about 4 years with this small but mighty team. So I just want to give them a shout out for this is really what I'm presenting today is really a team effort. And so I want to acknowledge all the folks on our teacher ed team. And so our orientation to today, to our quick time, 12 minutes today is we're going to first talk about common definitions and what our base is, where we start from. I'm going to share with you our critical social justice competencies that we've developed over the last few years. I'm going to highlight one particular IHE-LEA partnership and show you how we use the competencies to engage in conversations and do our work, and then share with you some of our future directions. So first, our definition of critical social justice, and we usually have our props handy, and you can't see my video, but we usually literally put our shades on when we look at this. But our perspective in doing this work, it starts with the common definition of critical social justice, which begins by recognizing that society is stratified along social group lines, that inequality is deeply and structurally embedded, and those inequalities are reproduced within schooling. It also acknowledges that we need to actively seek to make change that disrupts inhumane, unjust, and inequitable practices and patterns, to affirm and empower students, households, communities, colleagues, and ourselves to harness the resources needed to navigate an unjust world with empathy, savvy, and agency. And then finally, to dismantle systems and practices of oppression and reimagine love-soaked, empowering ecologies, which is important for us to engage in this work, because it's not always pleasant work. And when we say dive into the wreckage, that's not like you have people say, yeah, sign me up for that, I want to dive into the wreckage. But to do the work with some sense of optimism and joy, I think is important, so that we're not just depleting ourselves, but we're also recharging and re-energizing ourselves. We have developed a framework around this common definition of critical social justice that's based on an ecological model. And that ecological model includes domains, which are shown here in orange, that are include relationships and interactions that are not just enacted in classrooms, but that play out in classrooms and schools. Between those relationships include relationships between and across students, teachers, content schools, households, and communities. We also consider that we, in consideration of ourselves within this bigger ecology of schools, the others in the global and historical context that that schools are operating under. And then finally, that they're influenced by our own ideas and our experiences in schooling. And so as we look at this framework, we've developed competencies that we that kind of operationalize the different domains that are described here in this ecological model. And these have in turn been operationalized according to our definition of critical social justice. So when we talk about recognizing that the society is stratified, when we talk about actively seeking to make change through pedagogy, through understanding learning, through understanding social emotional learning, to affirm and empower students and communities by looking at their assets that they're bringing into the classroom, cultural, linguistic, and all other types of assets that they bring. And then finally, to dismantle oppressive systems, which is probably the most challenging part of this work that we do, is getting teachers to see themselves as disruptors in systems in schools that don't always feel like they're places where that work can be done, especially nowadays where teachers are being restricted as far as what they can and cannot include in their curriculum, and what they can, not so much in California, but we do see some of that happening where teachers aren't able to even bring up certain topics around race. And so we use this as our framework, and the way that this plays out is that these competency domains highlight the relationships that are in play, aspects of the teaching competencies, the actual operationalized practices. The high leverage practices aren't shown here. I'd be happy to share those with folks if they're interested in getting more granular level. But these are based on, of course, the research that we have synthesized around the TPEs, which are important, but those we considered as kind of like our base, right? Like we started with the TPs and said, well, what else what's missing here? And so one of the things that we added is a seminal and contemporary scholarship of research regarding teaching and learning, which is kind of like the base. But we also wanted to emphasize research and conducted by centering the experiences of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other marginalized populations in California. And so here's just a sampling of some of the scholars that are included, that we include in our program, that we highlight and center our competencies around. So, okay, so I'll talk specifically now about a particular partnership that or a grant that we have through the Department of Education. This is the Claremont Fellows Critical Social Justice Teaching Residency project or program. And it is an IHE-LEA partnership that supports 20 residents per year, provides them with a living stipend, a CSJ-centered Credential MA program, and this is a residency pathway that is approximately 18 months. We provide CSJ professional learning for mentor teachers, monthly critical practicums for mentor teacher and residents, include, in addition to their courses and programming that they do through the program, and then some induction support after. And this grant, we're on year 2 and at 2+, so almost year 3 of this grant. And so some of the takeaways that we have so far on this, just one, backing up here one bit, is how do we use the competency matrix and strengthening our partnerships? And one is we use it to support candidates in making connections between the theory and practice in their coursework. We drive and evaluate candidates' progress in their clinical setting. We provide opportunities for candidates to regularly self-assess their progress and set new goals. And then we also use it to orient the support that mentor teachers provide, as well as clinical faculty and other support providers in enacting critical social justice in their classrooms. So some takeaways that are emerging as we kind of do this work. One is that the biggest strength that our candidates have reported so far is being able to build rapport with their students. We call it building classroom ecology, but this has come during a time where this first cohort went through their first year as residents during COVID and during virtual learning, when it was super hard to build rapport. And for them to call this out as their biggest strength is really a testament of their of just their prioritizing and centering well-being and building relationships with students. The second kind of theme is this idea around grace and creating, maintaining classroom norms. Grace was unanimously named as a norm between fellows and their students. And we kind of think of this as like this idea and ethos of like, I got you, right? I see you, I got you. And we're in this together, and we're here to support you. The teachers are here to support their students, not in spite of, but recognizing all of the things that students are bringing in with them from the outside. So this was something that came out as a theme, or is coming out as a theme. But some third one is that they're still needing support navigating the tension between the values and the practices of schools and what they're learning through the critical social justice, or what they're learning about critical social justice within the program. And so they're not sure how to navigate that. And so for us, the work that we do with mentor teachers is really important, but we know and recognize that it could do better, and we have to do more to support teachers or our residents as they're experiencing this in the classroom. So our mentor teachers say, we love this, but we need more support. We need more training. We need to scale up, level up, and we want to do this work. We're excited and energized to do this work, but please provide us with more ability to do and support our students, our candidates, to do this work. Very briefly, now what? As we think about strengthening partnerships, we are looking at another project that we're going to be embarking on. That's really about how do we create sustainable ecosystems at LEAs, districts, or schools that include, the improving and increasing the number of teachers that are going into the profession. So this is like kind of the residency pipeline, or the strengthening that, but also supporting those residents and mentors with their ability to actually cultivate this, the practices that we're asking them to enact as part of their critical social justice teaching framework. So we have some projects that this project with the Department of Ed is ongoing, but we're looking at increasing the number of district partners, or the LEAs, that are going to be part of this new project, which really we're looking at how do we make it sustainable, right? So now we're talking about innovative staffing models, and how do we make sure that we're not, when the grant ends, that our work doesn't. So that's more or less what we're doing now. Just a quick thanks to Department of Ed, Cal Epic, and also, of course, CAIS for inviting me to speak. So this is very brief, but any questions, please feel free to contact me, email me, and I'd be able to share any of the materials that you might find helpful. Thank you.
We will have time for some questions at the end of the two presentations. So hopefully up to 10 minutes or so. Now we have our colleagues from Long Beach who are going to present.
So I'm Carol, tutor from Cal State Long Beach. As you can tell, I haven't talked to anyone except for my kitchen table for a really long time. So I feel a little tongue-tied and a little nervous. And this is my colleague.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nat Hansubada, special education professor too. I'm in the Liberal Studies Department and an Advanced Studies and Education Counseling Department in the College of Ed.
Yeah, and I should add, I'm also in the special education program, and then I co-direct our Center to Close the Opportunity Gap. That's a Cal State center housed at Cal State Long Beach. So we're really happy to be here talking to you all. And I know we have talked to you all over the years as this program has been developed and grown. We're going to talk a little bit about our Urban Dual Credential program. So we started developing this program sort of as like all these stars were aligning, right? What Mary talked about, the report had come out. There was all these rumors about this common trunk, and Cedar got funded. And so it was just all these like stars aligning and coming together. And I saw Marquita on the call a few minutes ago. So we talked to Marquita, Shireen and I, and we were like, let's do this. Like this, we're finally going to do a dual credential program. So when we developed it, the new TPEs weren't out yet, but we knew what was in the pipeline and what was going to be happening. And so we developed the program thinking about collaborative and inclusive models, UDL, MTSS, evidence-based practices, a focus on culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy, and then a really strong clinical model, modeling somewhat after residency programs. But at that time, the areas in the districts in our area weren't really ready, like didn't even need residents, right? We weren't in this sort of desperate situation. And sometimes our students weren't even getting, hired necessarily gen ed teachers out of the programs. So, because there just weren't as many jobs. So anyhow, we have two options for the students. They can be undergrads in their 4th or 5th year in our liberal studies program, or we have a post-baccalaureate option in their for students to apply. And typically we have about 20 to 25 students that are admitted each fall. And we're actually admitting in fall 2020 cohort 8 of this program, which is crazy to me because I feel like we just developed it. So, so I'll let Nat take over here.
So sorry, it's a little bit see on the screen. So I'll make sure to read it aloud and we'll forward our slides. So we just want to talk about some key components that really shaped and were critical in forming this program. Because before 2015, we had our separate credentials, our single, our multiple subject, our ed specialist, and housed in different departments with different expertise and faculty. And what was so special about the genesis of this is that faculty were given the opportunity to envision and dream what would be our ideal wishful credential program if we could create anything. And we didn't start with standards. We talked about what we wanted is, like Mary Sandy said, that that one system, that one inclusive system where we could prepare and train our candidates together, that we would build shared expertise, that we would model what we expected to see in the field. It's not that we just wanted to prepare teachers, future teachers, for how schools are, but how it should be. And so if we're going to expect them to co-teach someday, we're going to model co-teaching. We're going to have co-taught literacy classes. We're going to model what multi-tiered systems of support look like in our program. And that's how we shaped and built this clinical model. So again, we founded a team of collaborative, respective people who are visionaries in both teacher ed and special education, who came together and met often. And then we talked about, well, for teacher ed and special ed faculty, what do we believe is an inclusive, equitable model that we want all candidates to walk away with, for those that are getting their ed specialists, for those getting their multiple subject, as well as meeting both dual credential standards. And such a key factor was having such a supportive, also visionary administrator and our dean to give us each faculty assigned time where we could meet often, where we could wrestle with ideas, because it didn't come easy for us, and building shared language and understanding was difficult for some of those who have these dual integrated programs. And so taking time to learn that vocabulary, to learn one another's histories was so important, and giving us the release time to do that was just so amazing. And grateful to, as well as to Cedar with that funding and that support to build that and to dream up our program together. And then deciding who would be our ideal school district partners. And so our first school district was wonderful because they were this itty bitty, district with only 5,000 students. And so you can imagine a school district that small, access to the superintendent, and scheduling meetings with key people was wonderful. And having such a small district where the superintendent knew principals by first name and knew where amazing, practices were happening. So that was, part of all these critical pieces coming together and aligning themselves. And then we laid out what our coursework and clinical practice is. Like I said, because we really built this model, this program from an MTSS model, we structured it so that starting from that first semester, our students were in classrooms, 4 hours a week, implementing tier 1 interventions and lesson plans. That following semester, then they're implementing tier 2 and 3 interventions in the classroom. And again, really making sure that we're aligning what we're teaching and promoting with that MTSS model in mind. Do you want to say more about this, Kara?
Just that Nat mentioned it earlier, but we did have our literacy courses were co-taught by both the gen ed and special ed faculty, and still are. And that's one way we've been able to continue to model this important in the important work of co-teaching and MTSS. I think that's good. Okay. So one of the questions we were asked to talk a little bit about was about, and so we talked to, I was, talking about support from the college to operate these like early clinical practices in semester 1 and 2. So not only are those literacy classes co-taught, but our faculty have time built in to go observe and provide students feedback in tier 1 and tier 2 interventions. And so that has made a huge difference, I think, in how well they feel prepared once they even get to student teaching, but also like how well prepared they are once they enter the field. Another thing is we actually have 2 OSEP interdisciplinary training grants with school psychology, the school psychology program, which helps fund our students, but also helps facilitate those partnerships with the district, because there's another reason for us to be there, talking to them, meeting with them, right? And so we're just constantly developing and furthering those relationships. So I think these mutually beneficial partnerships have really been like the essence of what we've been doing with this program. We have strong partnerships with 3 local districts who are implementing MTSS and inclusive practices. And I think when we first went to districts to ask them to partner with us, we were very clear up front about what we were about, what UDCP is about. We're about MTSS, we're about inclusion, we're about culturally responsive and sustaining practices. And so that was the expectation. Not that they had to be implementing fully inclusive co-taught classrooms in every or anything like that, or even fully implementing MTSS, but that they had that vision too, right? That they had to see that this is what they wanted for their district, so that even if our students were there they were learning and growing with their master teachers, with the school sites, right? That they were, that we were part of their growth and process. And so I think that was really helpful. Another way that we've built partnerships is that our districts, because of the way our teachers are trained, they want to hire them. So this picture is actually, we have 4 students at one of the middle schools in one of our districts. They're basically are like the MTSS team, like the special ed and RSP teachers there that run their MTSS, you know, help run their MTSS program. And so they get to think about and do this work all day long now. And the district is so happy. Like several of these teachers, they just rave about like, can we replicate these teachers, you know, over and over again. They're just so happy to have them. And the other day, actually, just right before we were putting together this presentation, we got an email from one of our former students, and it was making what Sandy said, it really relates to that too. And she said, I just wanted to share what happened to me today. I was in a meeting with the district's other autism-focused teachers, and the topic of dual credentials was introduced. We were essentially told that dual credentials are the future. And when they asked if anyone had a dual credential, I got to proudly raise my hand, but I was the only one. And so, you know, this district has this vision also that teachers should be trained. And so it was like really wonderful to see that our student had it, but that like, we need to be doing this more, right? Like to me, that was a call to our profession to say like, this is what we need to be doing. Districts want to move this way. And, you know, even Long Beach Unified recently, they're implementing a very strong inclusive model where right now, several of their schools are piloting like K-2 fully inclusive co-taught classrooms. They're paying 2 teachers to be in each classroom so that their students can that benefit. And so our students are now there doing their clinical practice and will be doing their student teaching there next year. So we're really excited about that. But that also building that relationship and having them see the change. You know, we have graduates of our programs out there now too. And so that's been really useful. So this mutually beneficial partnership, right? And this mutual growth, I think I want to add like that it's not the expectation that everyone's going to be doing this perfect, because I think, you know, Eddie was saying it's like going into the wreckage, right? Like there's a lot we have to unpack and uncover. And so just like, are you willing to get messy with us? Are you willing to do this work with us? And I think that's been the most important thing. Oh, 1 minute, okay. So just talking about sustained partnerships, you know, one thing is meeting regularly with teachers. We're on campus a lot, so that has helped facilitate, right? They see our faces, they see us as part of the community in the schools. Coffee back in the day, or the good old days as my daughter calls it, coffee, lunches, you know, but even like the communication, Zoom, phone calls, check-ins. We've also have a principal at one of our districts that we've done writing and presenting together, right? So just continually feeding those relationships. And so I think from our perspective, probably the biggest lessons learned are really like to have a program run well and be developed well is to have the collaboration across the faculty, and collaboration with your partnership districts is critical. And then that level of support from the college, like we really could not have done this without Marquita and Shireen to have a model like this. They had to be 100% behind us. And
we're still evolving too, I would say, about the college support, because this year the program has received some funding to innovate and redesign. And we really want to focus on integrating that, you know, CRSP, culturally responsive, sustained practices, and our observation rubrics, and making sure that all faculty are trained and able to teach, do, observe, provide feedback on that. So we're continuing to evolve, and we want to, you know, best support our candidates and the schools they go into. So.
And also I'll add with that, you know, for future, you know, we're really looking at recruiting underrepresented students, and particularly Black African-American students. I think we have a really strong pipeline of Latinx students and Asian American students, but it's that's definitely a challenge. And so that's another area of focus for the program. I think we have our first Black African-American male in our program. And we're on cohort 7, right? So we have work to do there for sure.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. In the words of one of my good colleagues, it can be done, which I think is what we need to think about, is looking at these examples and thinking about what it takes to create programs that go into teacher education for inclusion and work with districts to make that happen. So do we have some questions for either of our folks? We have someone right here. Do we have any in the chat?
He's taking it.
My question is for the common trunk courses. They were started off early with the new regular ed universal standards in place, and then special ed came in 2018 and adopted the universal standards. So my question goes back to the trunk. Do you think we should be going retroactively into the common trunk, and can we embed some of those, early mile mod or extensive support needs standards, some of the more initial ones that are more basic, can those get embedded into the common trunk? Should they be embedded in the common trunk that all students go through?
So the microphone wound its way to the center of the table for some reason. I
think we all looked your way, Mary.
I'm making eye contact with William Hattrick in the room too, who you may want to take a mic over to him because he's probably going to compliment whatever I say. So we've been working on how to bridge from the earlier, not old, but an earlier form of the ed specialist credential to the new form. There's absolutely no mandate that somebody do that to get into but you know what, William, let me not speak for you. You answer this, some form of this question every other day.
It's on, right? Yes. And Joy, just to clarify, you're talking about sort of more building the program out based on the universals that were passed in 2018. So, and this may actually be a question for our program representatives or anyone else in the room, looking at those special ed TPEs and integrating them with the universals. Right, by all means. And that's why we have that comparison document, which was sort of our best guess of where some of those ed specialist TPEs could be an extension of the general education TPEs. And so there's certainly relationships that we see there. Some are definitely standalone, and we've identified those. But yeah, it's not meant to sort of be stacked. They do the universal and then they do the ed specialist. Is that getting at the heart of your question, or? Oh, right. Yes, very good point. So that comment was that, infusing some of those ISPs and A's into the universal TPE coursework for the ed specialist TPEs, I mean, that's a great idea. And then the gen ed candidates are hopefully getting some of that knowledge as well, because we always get that question, ed specialist is having to do all this specialized preparation. What about our gen ed? And though we did infuse more of those mild moderate competencies into the gen ed TPEs when they were redone in 15 and 16, there could always be more. So, and that's sort of how we envisioned it, that it would not be a stacked approach when it came to the TPEs. And then, once, if you're participating in the TPA field test now, you're probably getting a sense of where things are going to land in which of the 2 cycles. So hopefully, that will sort of guide your program development as well. And I also just want to speak to this because it's a question we get very often about dual credentialing. If you are an approved program sponsor with an approved gen ed program and an approved ed specialist program, you are approved to have a dual pathway. We don't approve the pathway, just the programs. So you can certainly ask us questions and we can provide you support and talk to you about acceptable program length, that kind of thing. But if you're already approved for Gen Ed and Ed Specialist, you're approved to offer a dual pathway. So there's no extra work you need to do for us. Just want to make that clear. Jen. Yes. Which part? Oh. Right, so the question came up earlier in the CAPC-TED meeting about the 600 hours plus the 150. So just to clarify, it is a recommended 150 hours. It is not required. And that's really because we need to be flexible with the design of your program and also the variety of settings that your candidates could be in. So if they're already in an inclusive classroom and they're working with a gen ed teacher and there's general ed students and students with disabilities together, that 600 hours, well, really, let's say the final 400 could be sufficient, right, for their final student teaching. They may not need that extra 150 because they're already in a setting that covers both of those areas. So I think that's an important part to remember, and thanks for bringing it up again, Jen. The 150 is recommended, not required. And again, if they're getting mild mod and early childhood, mild mod and extensive, that 150 is not part of that at all. So they could need some additional hours, but not required by us, okay? All right.
Thank you so much for
Sorry to overtake the mic here.
No, you know, I appreciate that. It gives us great perspective, right? And it really allows us to see what the opportunities are for ensuring that we have more inclusive educators or dual credentialed candidates. So that's exciting to hear. So thank you so much for that information. Oh, let me go back. So I want to make sure you get to your reception on time. So I do want to let you know that we have 3 subcommittees for the California Alliance for Inclusive Schooling. And if you're interested at all in getting involved, I encourage you to reach out and connect with us. And here is our website, inclusioncalifornia.org, and you can reach us at that email address there. Thank you everyone for joining the California Alliance for Inclusive Schooling Policy Summit, and I will see you all at the reception.